I tried to end my affair quietly, but my loving husband walked in on my final meeting with my secret partner. I am selfish. This is what I tell myself every night when my house is silent without my children. My ex-husband has every reason to hate me. My immediate family is broken, and I have never stopped despising myself for what I did. My selfish act happened in 2015 when I was 39 years old. I confess that I took my ex-husband for granted. He called me beautiful every day, craved closeness, cared for me, and treated me as his equal, not as a queen or a princess, but as a true partner. We were married for 20 years, high school sweethearts, and each other's first love. My family adored him, and he supported my brother through difficult times. He was the person everyone turned to for help, a genuinely good man. Over the years, I gave him 2 strong sons, 18 and 16, and twin daughters, 13. I gained weight and became self-conscious, but he always reassured me that I was beautiful. We rarely argued, but when we did, it was mostly about intimacy, which I wasn't always in the mood for. When I turned 39, everything changed. After a year of working out at the gym, doing yoga and Pilates, I transformed from 180 pounds to 135 pounds, a major change for someone who had always been chubby. My ex-husband also joined the gym, though not as often, going from 260 pounds to 225 pounds. Despite his growing affection, I still wasn't interested in intimacy. We tried everything: romantic dinners, dancing, walks, and he even helped more around the house. He looked at me with desire, even after 20 years of marriage. Any woman would long for that kind of love, but I felt nothing. I thought it was early menopause. We were intimate only 2 or 3 times a month, and while he wanted more, I kept refusing, even when he suggested couples therapy. Then, my selfishness took over. A new manager at my office started showing interest in me shortly after my birthday. He was slightly younger, attractive, and for some reason drawn to me. At first, I ignored him, but soon, it turned from avoidance to casual conversations. Then he started flirting. I showed him my wedding ring as a warning. For 2 months, he continued flirting, and eventually I flirted back. I opened up to him about my life, and before I knew it, I was thinking about him constantly. Looking back, I now realize it was an emotional affair. At the time, I felt excited and alive. My ex-husband sensed something was wrong. We had a heated argument, which, in my mind, started when he tried to kiss me. I made a disgusted face, not because of him, but because I was thinking about the other man. I hated myself for that moment, but I told myself it was just frustration. A week later, I met the new manager at a cafe. I intended to tell him to leave me alone, that I couldn't do this. But before I could say a word, he kissed me. My mind went blank, and that was the beginning of our 6-month affair. During that time, I did things with him that my ex-husband had always wanted. I was eager, adventurous, and always in the mood because it felt exciting and new. Meanwhile, my marriage suffered even more. I distanced myself from my husband, criticized him over small things, and even belittled him. I am deeply ashamed of how I treated him. The wake-up call came when my brother visited. He told me my ex-husband had confided in him, admitting he was depressed and thinking about separating from me. He felt unloved and was falling out of love with me. That snapped me out of my selfishness. I immediately ended the affair, quit my job, and resolved to rebuild my marriage. I was determined to make my husband feel wanted and loved again. But I made one final mistake. My affair partner came to my house to drop off a box of my office belongings. He wanted to know why I ended things. I told him I needed to fix my marriage and asked him to leave. But he insisted on one last intimate encounter, and foolishly, I agreed. We ended up in the guest room. I don't know how long it lasted, but suddenly, he flinched violently. There was a loud bang. My ex-husband was standing in the doorway. My affair partner was on the floor, and there was a large hole in the wall. I tried to speak, but my husband's eyes were bloodshot, tears streaming down his face, his lips trembling. He was in agony, and I felt sick with guilt. My affair partner stood up and tried to leave. My ex-husband stared at him, and my AP warned him to back off if he knew what was good for him. That's when my husband lost control and attacked him. I screamed, begging him to stop. Out of desperation, I jumped on his back to pull him away, but he threw me off, slamming me onto the floor. Everything became blurry. Sounds were muffled. When I regained my senses, my ex-husband was holding my AP down while on the phone. All I could do was stare at my AP's swollen face, the blood, and the teeth scattered on the floor beside him. There was a loud banging at the door. My ex put the phone on speaker, slowly placed it on the ground, dropped to his knees, and put his hands behind his head. The police stormed in, handcuffed him, and paramedics arrived. He had called special services on himself. Everything fell apart from there. At the hospital, my father didn't say a word. He just looked at me with shame. My brother screamed at me, devastated, asking how I could betray my husband. My mother tried to comfort me, but my father lashed out at her. My ex-husband's family was furious. His sisters threatened me, and his parents looked like they wanted me gone. When I approached my children, they refused to speak to me. My sons couldn't even look at me. Meanwhile, my affair partner was in critical condition, needing reconstructive surgery. My ex-husband had practically shattered his face. At the hospital, a woman stormed into my room and attacked me. My brother pulled her off, and I soon learned she was my AP's wife. I had no idea he was married. He never wore a ring or mentioned her. That realization crushed me even more. Leading up to the trial, my sons stayed with their grandparents. My daughters refused to talk to me, and my ex wanted nothing to do with me. I tried visiting him in county jail, but I was denied. My brother, who worked in corrections, made sure he was placed in the facility where he could watch over him. When I asked my brother to deliver a message to my ex, he told me to go to hell. The trial was the first time I saw my husband in months. When he looked at me, there was no love, only hate. I had never seen that in his eyes before. It hurt more than anything. During the trial, I was forced to recount every detail of my affair. When I admitted how long it lasted, my ex-husband looked destroyed. My father stood up and walked out of the courtroom. Then came my ex-husband's testimony. He had come home that day to surprise me, with lunch and a romantic weekend getaway to the Catskills. He had planned everything, hoping to rekindle our love. Instead, he walked in on me with another man. He confessed that when my AP warned him to step back, he lost control. He attacked without thinking, only stopping when I jumped on him. In court, we listened to the 911 recording. His sobs, the pain in his voice as he followed the operator's instructions, it was soul-crushing. My AP couldn't testify in person. He was still heavily medicated. Instead, they showed images of his injuries, making me physically sick. My ex had shattered his eye socket, cheekbones, and destroyed his jaw.
And it was all my fault.
They said the bone fragments were too small to piece together. My former partner was charged with a third-degree felony and sentenced to 7 years. My sons protested loudly. My daughters and his family wailed. The sound of their grief still haunts me. The first 3 months were unbearable. My ex's soon-to-be ex-wife sued me for alienation of affection. My ex initiated a divorce. My eldest son moved out. Another son isolated himself. My twins rebelled fiercely. My former sisters-in-law attacked me at Price Chopper, and his mother spat in my face when I tried to apologize. My father and brother refused to speak to me. I had to find a new job since I had no income and had nearly depleted my savings. But I was practically blacklisted in my field. The accounting firm faced bad publicity, so I took a job in retail and worked as a seasonal H&R Block adjuster during tax season. I almost lost my house. My ex refused to let me visit him. Every letter I sent was returned. Crying in the shower became a daily routine. My parents nearly separated because my mother constantly defended me while my father refused to forgive me. My brother ignored my existence. Even lifelong friends were divided. The guilt was suffocating. I thought about leaving, about disappearing. Eventually, I sought therapy. My therapist didn't comfort me. Instead, she scolded me. She said I had grown too comfortable with my ex, that I didn't see him as a husband but as a friend with benefits, and I treated him as such. She was right. I had taken him for granted. A year passed in silence between me and my children. When I cooked dinner, they would take their plates and eat in their rooms, refusing to look at me. I had breakdowns, begging them to talk to me, but they remained silent. My brother got married, but I wasn't invited. My kids were. I kept trying to visit my ex, hoping he would finally allow me on his visitor list, but I was always denied. My letters kept coming back, deepening my depression. Then one day, my brother showed up unexpectedly. His face was full of rage. He told me my ex had been stabbed in prison during an attempted assault. My ex had fought back, leaving the attacker with a broken spine, but he had taken a stab wound to the stomach in the process. My brother screamed at me, "You did this," before storming out. I cried for days because I knew he was right. For 4 more years, I kept trying to visit my ex, kept writing him letters, but every attempt was rejected. Thankfully, our children visited him often. I later learned that my brother had arranged for him to be placed in protective custody after the attack. Over the years, my eldest son followed in his father's footsteps, attending the same college and taking the same major. He never called me. He only spoke to his siblings and spent holidays at his grandparents' house, never at mine. My second son did the same college, same silent treatment. My twins stayed with me, but they visited their father weekly. Whenever they became too rebellious, my brother disciplined them. My brother and I still barely spoke. When he and his wife had their first child, I tried to visit them, but I was asked to leave. My mother kept me updated about their lives, but my father still refused to acknowledge me. The truth behind their return. In early May of this year, my children started coming around more often. My second son even moved back home. I didn't know why, and I didn't care. I was just happy to have them near. For 4 months, I did everything I could to show my love and apologize for the past. At first, they ignored me, but then they slowly began talking to me again. I learned about my eldest son's long-term girlfriend, my second son's success on the college track team, and my daughter's interests. Their laughter filled the house again. I held on to those moments, cherishing them. But the self-hatred never faded. Watching them joke and smile together only reminded me of what I had taken from them. By the end of August, I was excited about my twins' upcoming 18th birthday, which also marked the beginning of their senior year. I eagerly shared my plans for their birthday party, but they hesitated. Then they asked, "Can we do it on a different day?" I was confused. I thought we were healing. I asked them why. One of them finally admitted, "Because Dad is throwing us a party, and I don't want you near him." The words hit me like a knife to the chest. Asked when their father had been released. They told me he had been out since the end of April, on good behavior. Tears welled in my eyes. Their sudden presence in my life wasn't because we were healing. It was because he was back. They were happy, not because they forgave me, but because they had their father again. I asked where he was staying. They told me he was living with my brother. I called my brother, desperate to talk to him. He refused to answer. So I drove to his house, clutching the stack of letters that had been returned over the years. I saw my ex briefly through the crack in the door. I called his name, but my brother blocked my way. I begged him, pleaded with him, but he told me to leave. As I turned to go, I heard his voice. I spun around, tears streaming down my face. He was walking toward me. I ran to him, sobbing, and threw my arms around him. He didn't hug me back. Instead, he coldly placed the stack of letters in my hands and said, "You forgot this." Then he walked away. I watched in agony as he disappeared back inside. I begged him to talk to me, pleaded for him to give me a chance, but the door shut in my face. My children stood by the doorway, watching, and in their eyes, there was no love for me, only indifference. I realized that my children were only tolerating me. But despite that, I still want to fix things. I want to tell him how selfish I was, how much I missed him. I want to apologize for destroying what we had. So, I keep pushing through my daily life, trying to move forward. Recently, I learned from my mother that my almost partner's ex-wife had been visiting him in prison 2 years ago, and she's been coming around to see him ever since. I tell myself I don't care. But deep down, all I want is for him to forgive me. I just want him to talk to me, to be beside me, to look at me the way he used to. I want my kids to be with us again. I just want my family back. But I know I don't deserve it. Even if, by some miracle, we became one again, it would never be the same. I was selfish, and I wish I could take it all back. A son's response to his mother's post. I try my hardest to keep my past a secret. My college friends have no idea that my dad spent time in prison, and I don't plan on telling them. But one day, while walking around campus, I overheard people talking about a post. Something about it felt off. It brought back emotions I had buried for years. So I looked into it, and to my horror, I found enough details to confirm it was about my family. I was furious. I called my mother, demanding answers. But she got emotional, which only made the argument worse. I visited my dad, told him what happened, and that led to another confrontation. Even after all that, I still believe my father is a good man. Instead of fueling my anger, he scolded me for disrespecting my mother. He told me that even if I don't love her, I should still respect her. But how do you respect someone like her? My father went through hell and never stopped reminding us that we should be grateful for the lives we have. He grew up in the South Bronx, where simply trying to do better made you a target. At 15, he lost his father to cancer. With no life insurance, he became a surrogate parent to his two sisters, working to help pay rent and buy food while attending school. His mother later remarried, and they moved to upstate New York, which gave them a fresh start. According to my uncle, my dad's unique style in the 90s, baggy clothes, a Puerto Rican flag shirt, made him the target of teasing. But instead of walking away, he fought back. That earned him their respect. In an unexpected twist, he even befriended one of them, offering to skip school, share a drink, and just talk things out. That same friend later introduced my dad to my mom. They went to college together. By the end of their freshman year, they were married. Growing up, I remember how affectionate my parents were. Always holding hands. Always kissing. Even in my senior year, my father acted like a teenager in love. But he never placed my mother on a pedestal. He always said a wife should be a best friend, an equal, a confidant. My dad was a big guy, 5 feet 11 inches and 260 pounds, but he was always active, always joking. He would sing to my mom, surprise her with flowers, leave her little love notes. He defended her honor. He made sure she knew she was beautiful. He was the kind of man every girl should have in her life. He stood by my uncle when everyone else gave up on him. My grandfather used to say, "Your dad knocked the stupid out of him and left behind the man he was supposed to be." That always made me laugh. My dad taught me how to be a man, a friend, a husband. Before her affair, my mother loved my dad. He was her rock, and she destroyed him. I remember those months when she started talking down to him. He pushed back, but he held himself together. Despite being a college-educated financial advisor, my dad could switch in an instant, 0 to a more assertive, no-nonsense demeanor. My grandmother said he was like his father, kind, respectable, helpful, but never afraid to defend himself. Still, he tried everything. Flowers,
Dinners. Dancing.
but she was already gone, trapped in her own world.
We all saw it.
We saw how she treated him, how much it hurt him, and yet he smiled at us. He promised us they would work it out. He truly believed my mom was just stressed, that it was her job. Then he got arrested. Mom, do you know the humiliation we felt when the whole school was talking about it? Dad was arrested because you cheated. I couldn't even look at you. I stayed at Grandma's because the very sight of you disgusted me. And when I visited Dad, he couldn't even look at me. He told me he had failed as a man, as a husband. I told him he didn't. But he insisted he did. A real man, he said, would have thought about the consequences before doing something so foolish. A real husband wouldn't have been betrayed. I begged him to look at me.
He wouldn't.
And then you had the audacity to ask us for forgiveness. For the first time in my life, I wanted to hurt you. We were all suffering. And all you could think about was making yourself feel better. The trial was hell. 25 minutes. That's how long we had to sit there, listening to that special services call. 25 minutes of hearing my father sob. 25 minutes of him begging for help. Begging because the love of his life had betrayed him. I know you tried to be a character witness for Dad. We all told you not to.
But you did it anyway. Why?
To prove you still loved him? To tell the court he was a good man? Your cross-examination destroyed him. The moment they made you reveal how long you had been with that other man, I knew. That was it. That was why we lost him. We had a court-appointed lawyer. If we had hired a real one, he might have walked. Instead, my father went to prison. I developed anger issues. My brother became a closet drinker. One of the twins was suicidal. And you didn't notice. Because all you cared about was fixing things with Dad. I had to be the parent. I was working a full-time job, going to college, and sending you money for bills. And then Dad got stabbed. I had just seen him that morning, joking about his prison workout routine. I was halfway back to school when I got the call. I nearly crashed my car. And when Grandma and Grandpa died, Dad couldn't even go to the funeral. Did you know his sisters got married in the waiting area just so he could give them away? Mom, the damage you caused is unthinkable. And it didn't help that you kept begging us to forgive you. You never gave us time to heal. You just kept asking.
And asking.
And asking. We were supposed to suddenly act normal? Just because you were ready? Dad told us to start talking to you again. He said you were a good mother.
So we did.
And it made you happy.
For a while.
But when you showed up after he was released, it made him sick. He threw up after seeing you. He said the very sight of you disgusted him. He's been seeing her for over 3 years. They've been together since he got out. So stop. Stop fantasizing about fixing things. Dad only sees you as the mother of his children. Nothing more. If you really want to fix things, call me. But that post? The one about our worst moment? That was pure selfishness.